increase our sense of where we place value, that we value human beings and human life more, and that we recognize human suffering. And human suffering is not just in the externals that we tend to identify more. Human suffering can be invisible and yet profound. And what I couldn't see is what is going to happen to this planet if we don't begin to deal differently, changing the paradigm, changing our culture, changing our beliefs, and valuing the healing process that needs to happen, and creating programs that will address trauma recovery in mass numbers. So a lot of the focus in Living Ubuntu has to do with raising awareness of issues of trauma and seeking to develop methods that can be used in large numbers of people for trauma recovery, as well as a few other things, addressing stress, compassion fatigue, and supporting health and well-being, living in community, and with a focus on recognizing the connection between the mind and the body. Can you pull up the Lowen quote? Alexander Lowen is actually the founder of bioenergetics, and that's my background. I'm certified as a bioenergetic therapist. I doubt there's any of you in this room that knows what that means, except maybe accepting Anshul, who's the co-founder of the organization. But it's a form of psychotherapy that uses somatic methods in its work. So it uses body work. It recognizes the wounds and the trauma that we hold in the body and uses methods to release, not just talk therapy, not just the psychological. So I really appreciate this quote from Alexander Lowen. If a person cannot see horror, then he can neither see beauty, nor sadness, anger, fear, or love. And we tend to want to block the horror, when we don't have a culture that really encourages us to do this. But we tend to not recognize the price we're paying. That when we block out one aspect of life, we inevitably block out others. And so to be able to be a whole person, to be able to maintain our compassion and our love and our heart, inevitably part of what we need to be witness to is the horror. And again, sometimes the horror is in outright atrocities. Sometimes the horror is in the cold treatment of one another. Sometimes the horror is the disconnect we do to ourselves, where we expect ourselves to keep going and we ignore the deadening lifestyle that has become normal in our culture. I think part of how we are tuning out the horror, part of the deadening process, I think we really need to take a hard look at what is going on in our culture today, where we've gone in recent times. I mean, there's a lot of these issues that have been around for a very long time, but we have some new ones we're dealing with. We love the convenience of electronic gadgets, but we seem to be using them to multitask more, without recognizing that we're losing human contact, we're losing human connection, we're losing time in nature, we're losing time with animals. And there's a sense of denial that attempting to do so much communication and spend so much time electronically, it really can have a very numbing, deadening influence on us. And the problem with growing numb is once you're numb, you don't really tend to feel how numb you are. And there's a real correlation between symptoms of trauma and symptoms of chronic stress. They're more on a continuum, but they both activate your fight-flight system. So they're actually very similar, just by degree. So sort of the psychic numbing that comes with PTSD can also be very true, maybe to a lesser degree, in leading a chronically stressful lifestyle. And if you look around, I mean, I don't know if you guys seem to maybe know a few people that I haven't met, but of those I know, I don't know anyone that isn't feeling kind of a chronic overwhelm, a chronic busyness, a shortage of time, having trouble unplugging, having trouble letting down, far distant from kind of a contemplative life of self-exploration. It's as if it's come to be normal to lead a disembodied life, to go through the motions, and to accept a life where we don't really feel very much of anything, not on a deep feeling level. So I think that this is very personally troubling to me, that we're really denying what we're doing to ourselves and the implications. Our culture does not give us a lot of support for making wise choices for ourselves. It's the norm, maybe, to be sleep deprived, to not take good care of ourselves in many, many ways, and just keep going. And in fact, a lot of times people will pat us on the back for being so strong. And ultimately, it weakens us, because we're not machines. We're human beings. And when we begin to treat ourselves as if we're machines, we're becoming a little bit more inhuman. Because you can't disconnect from yourself and still be fully present and loving and compassionate towards others. We develop blocks, we develop blind spots. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what got called the Good Samaritan study, where they studied a bunch of theological students. And in one scenario, they were in a rush. In another scenario, they were not in a rush. And then they had a situation that they would encounter that they didn't know was part of the experiment. And it was a person in need. And they were tested to see, what would the rushing students do when presented with a need? What would the students that were unrushed do? And those that were unrushed were much more apt to help a person in need. The students that were told, you're late, get there, rush over now, far less apt to help. So our chronic busyness and our deadening influences and our stress and always doing and multitasking, it takes a toll on our awareness to even perceive the needs around us and to cultivate being able to maintain a compassionate state inside from which we could respond with genuinely. I don't have a slide for this one, but there's a Paul Farmer quote that I wanted to sneak in here somewhere. The only real nation is humanity. And I was thinking about that in the context of our work for Orange County for Darfur. And there are some that sometimes say to us, why do you focus on those other places when there's so many needs here? And I think we are denying and we are blocking this sense of interconnectedness. That what happens over there does impact us here. And until we can get to this place of living within ourselves, keeping our hearts open, cultivating a deep contemplative inner life, where we really examine what is going on with us so that we can actually be available and present with each other. So that we can recognize the inhumanity within ourselves, that we're at risk of enacting if we have blind spots to it being within us. I mean, these are the stepping stones to getting to a place, to being able to live resonating with the interconnectedness of all of humanity. And I think there is a way in which all human beings have wounds. I mean, we do not get through, none of us get through this life without incurring betrayal and heartbreak and disappointment and many, many things, many different kinds of wounds. And there's an intergenerational process that goes on. We had parents, they had wounds. Did they resolve all their wounds? No, some of them got enacted upon their children. It's inevitable. But the more that we're able to bring healing into our own life, in a sense, I think we are healing the wounds of our ancestors because they're part of how we got these wounds today. And the work we do with ourselves to heal our own wounds, not just healing the wounds of our ancestors, we're setting the stage for there to be fewer wounds for the next generation to then have to deal with. And I tend to think that in our hectic pace, in our over-adrenalized society, we tend to be very impatient and we tend to not be able to pay attention for very long. And another consequence of this is there are times that we're going to have faith in the unseen. If we do an action and it's a right action and we get a good result and we see payoff, that's great. And that isn't always the way it is. Because sometimes things take a very, very long time. And if we're addicted to instant gratification, we're in trouble. So I think the faith in the unseen is a key part because we need to live in the way we need to live. And sometimes we need to accept that the payoff may not even be in our lifetime. And you can look at examples such as Rosa Parks and know that she was not the beginning of a movement. And all those who suffered and struggled and worked hard before that incident, they didn't get to know if they were going to get a payoff or not. They had to stay true, they had to stay committed, they had to do what they believed in with faith in the unseen. So I think we can expect some payoff.